The Ethereum Foundation is falling apart, and nobody can agree on why. Picture this. You've spent over a decade building one of the most important pieces of financial infrastructure on the planet. You're the backbone of a network that secures trillions of dollars in assets. You helped invent DeFi, NFTs, the smart contract economy of the whole thing. And then, in the span of a few months, your best people start walking out the door one by one, while critics line up on social media to declare you irrelevant, out of touch, and frankly, kind of a mess. That is exactly what is happening right now to the Ethereum Foundation. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are going deep on one of the most fascinating and honestly underreported stories in all of crypto right now. The Ethereum Foundation is back at the center of a full-blown culture war, and it goes way deeper than a few resignations. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand what's actually at stake for Ethereum and for crypto as a whole. Let's start at the beginning, because not everyone watching this knows exactly what the Ethereum Foundation is, or why it matters so much. The Ethereum Foundation, or EF as the community calls it, is a Switzerland-based nonprofit that was founded back in 2014, just ahead of Ethereum's mainnet launch in 2015. It was created to be the primary steward of the Ethereum protocol, funding research, supporting developers, organizing upgrades, and generally making sure the network stayed true to its original vision. For years, it was the closest thing Ethereum had to a central authority, which, in a decentralized ecosystem, is a pretty weird and uncomfortable position to be in. And that tension has never fully gone away. Over the years, the EF has funded some of the most important technical work in the space, things like the merge, which transitioned Ethereum from proof of work to proof of stake. It has employed some of the sharpest protocol researchers in the industry, and it has always operated from a public goods philosophy, meaning it exists not to make money, but to serve the network. That philosophy sounds noble, and in many ways it is. But as we'll see in a moment, it has also become one of the most contested aspects of the EF's identity. The EF currently holds only about 0.16% of all ETH in existence. Compare that to many other blockchain foundations, which control anywhere from 10% to 50% of their own token supply. That's a remarkably small stake for an organization that has historically wielded enormous soft power over the direction of the protocol. And that soft power, it is now very much under fire. So what actually triggered all of this drama? Let's talk about the people who have been leaving. Since January of 2026, at least 8, and by some counts 9, senior contributors have departed the Ethereum Foundation. That's not a slow trickle, that's a wave. And the timing and the names involved have sent shockwaves through the Ethereum community. Let's go through some of the most notable exits. First, there's Dankrad Feist. Dankrad is one of the most respected protocol researchers in the Ethereum space, the kind of person whose opinions on scaling architecture actually move markets. He quietly transitioned from a full-time EF role back in October 2025 to join Tempo, a new VC-backed Layer 1 blockchain backed by Stripe and Paradigm, while staying on as a part-time EF advisor. That was already a yellow flag, but it was just the beginning. Then came Tomasz Stanczak, who had been serving as co-executive director of the EF. He stepped down, leading to the appointment of 2 new interim co-executive directors, Bastian Aue and Xiaowei Wang, in February 2026. After that, the floodgates opened. Senior contributors started exiting one by one through the spring. Josh Stark, a board co-steward who had been with the foundation for about 7 years and was co-chair of the landmark $1 trillion security initiative, announced his exit in April. Tim Bako, a well-known name in Ethereum's core development community, Carl Beikhuizen, Barnabe Mono, Julian Ma, Trent Van Epps, and Alex Stokes, co-lead of the protocol cluster, went on an open-ended sabbatical. 5 of these departures happened in May alone. Now, to be fair, and when this is important, not all of these exits carry the same weight. Some were planned transitions. Josh Stark, for instance, was clear in his own statement that he made the decision in early March with no drama attached. Several departures are still in their wind-down windows as of late May. The full picture is messier and more complicated than the mass exodus narrative that has taken over crypto Twitter. But here's the thing, even if you discount some of the noise, the optics are terrible. 8 or 9 senior people leaving any organization in a single year is a big deal. Doing it at a moment when Ethereum is facing the most intense competitive pressure it has ever faced from rival chains, that's a crisis. Full stop. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because the departures don't exist in a vacuum. They happened alongside something that ignited a much deeper debate about what the Ethereum Foundation even is. On March 13, 2026, the EF published a document called The Promise of Ethereum, introducing the EF mandate. The accompanying PDF runs 38 pages, and it reads in the Foundation's own description as, quote, part constitution, part manifesto, and part guide. The mandate made a very clear and deliberate choice about the EF's identity. It reframed the foundation not as a driver of adoption or a competitive player in the blockchain industry, but as a steward of Ethereum's core principles. It explicitly warned against trading those principles away for financialization or institutional wins. And at the center of the mandate is this framework called CROPS, censorship and capture resistance, resistance to centralization pressures, openness, privacy, and security. The CROPS framework represents Vitalik Buterin's vision of what makes Ethereum genuinely different from other blockchains. It's the cypherpunk soul of the project. The idea that Ethereum's value isn't just in being fast or cheap, but in being fundamentally trustless and resistant to coercion by governments, corporations, or any centralized power. The mandate even contains dramatic language, a passage often paraphrased as something like a source seppuku license, suggesting the foundation should essentially fall on its own sword if it ever betrays these principles. Powerful stuff, right? And for a lot of people in the Ethereum community, genuinely inspiring. But for others, the mandate was a red flag. And that's where the culture war really kicked off. Critics looked at this 38-page philosophical document and asked, why is the foundation writing manifestos when Ethereum is losing market share? Why are you codifying cypherpunk ideology when your biggest competitor, Solana, is eating your lunch in terms of user activity and developer mindshare? Dankred Feist himself was among those who pushed back quickly. In a post on X, he said the document showed the EF was, quote, going back to its old ways and backsliding on a focus on real-world Ethereum usage. He wrote, guys, I love Ethereum and EF, but please stop writing 30-page manifestos and let's support builders, build apps, talk to users. And Yuga Kohler, an engineer at Coinbase, raised concerns that the foundation may be too focused on ideological principles at a time when Ethereum faces serious competition for institutional capital. The debate had been started. If Dankred Feist was measured in his criticism, other voices in the community were not. The person who maybe said the quiet part the loudest was Zach Cole, a longtime Ethereum contributor, during a recent appearance on Laura Shin's Unchained podcast. His quote became the headline of basically every article written about this story. He said, and I'm going to quote him directly here because nothing I could paraphrase would quite capture the energy. The EF is completely out of touch. They're funding hippos in Asia and doing a bunch of stuff nobody in the world gives a son about other than Vitalik and his little cabal. Now, that's a spicy take. But Cole went on to make a more substantive point that a lot of people in the community actually agree with. He said, Ethereum is no longer a startup. It's a mature and robust ecosystem. There's billions, trillions of dollars on the line. Livelihoods are dependent on that. That's the crux of the critical argument. The EF was built for a different era. When Ethereum was scrappy and young, a philosophical research nonprofit made perfect sense. But now, the network is critical infrastructure for global finance. And the critics say it deserves an organization that operates with that level of seriousness and urgency. And then there's the ETH price question, which nobody wants to talk about, but everyone is thinking about. ETH has had a rough stretch. It fell roughly 57% from near $5,000 last summer to around $2,000 as of late May 2026, hovering stubbornly around the $2,000 level. Meanwhile, Bitcoin has been on a tear. Solana has been the narrative darling, and ETH has largely been left behind in the latest cycle. Is the EF responsible for that? No, not directly, but critics argue that the EF's indifference to ETH's price and market position is a symptom of a deeper problem. An organization that has lost touch with the commercial and economic realities of the ecosystem it stewards, which brings us to the most dramatic proposal to come out of this entire crisis. Dankrad Feist, the same researcher who left for a competitor and criticized the mandate, went even further in May. He publicly proposed creating a new, completely independent organization, separate from the EF, with initial funding of at least $1 billion in ETH. The explicit mission of this new organization, making ETH's price go up, improving execution, capturing value for token holders. Ryan Sean Adams, one of the most prominent Ethereum advocates and investors, publicly backed the concept. Adams argued that the future of Ethereum cannot and should not depend solely on the Ethereum Foundation. Think about that for a second. One of Ethereum's most senior former researchers is proposing a rival billion-dollar institution because he doesn't trust the existing one to look out for ETH holders. That is a remarkable moment. Now, you knew Vitalik Buterin wasn't going to stay silent through all of this, and on May 24th, 2026, he published a lengthy post on X, roughly 1,500 words, that was clearly designed to address the chaos head-on. First, he was careful to frame the post as his personal perspective, not an official statement from the EF board. That framing itself was interesting, a sign of how much the organization is trying to be seen as something more than just Vitalik's personal project. His core argument: the Ethereum Foundation was never supposed to be everything to everyone. He wrote, "The EF is choosing to use its remaining resources to pursue longevity over breadth." And then, in a line that surprised a lot of people with its bluntness, "Yes, this means we sell less ETH." Vitalik essentially doubled down on the crop's vision. He pushed back hard against the idea that Ethereum should try to compete on speed alone, writing, and this is a great line, "Being as fast and as scalable as possible, and only a small epsilon more decentralized than the others, is a route to mediocrity, and if we try it, we will lose." He argued that the EF's role is now that of one node with a defined purpose alongside other nodes, not the center of the universe, but one important player in a broader ecosystem. He acknowledged that other organizations outside the EF need to step up to advocate for ETH as an asset and drive commercial adoption. He also made a surprisingly personal disclosure. Vitalik revealed that nearly 90% of his personal net worth is in ETH. The remaining roughly $40 million he has in stablecoins, already committed to open source biotech, software, and hardware initiatives. In other words, don't accuse him of not being aligned with ETH's success. On the question of his own role within the foundation, Vitalik said his influence will continue to shrink. And that's honestly what I want. The board is expanding. The goal is to make the EF least dependent on any single person, including its founder. He also outlined 3 major technical priorities for Ethereum's next phase: formally verified and provably bug-free code using AI-assisted verification tools, progress on privacy infrastructure, and post-quantum security. Vitalik also pushed back on some of the broader criticism about the EF's technical delivery, noting that new protocol team leadership is actively working on raising the gas limit to 200 million, advancing the proposer-builder split, and pushing toward mainnet grade ZK EVMs with 128-bit provable security. This is not an organization that has stopped working, but here's the harder question that Vitalik's post didn't fully answer. Can a smaller, more ideologically focused EF actually win in the current environment? Can Ethereum hold its ground against Solana and the new wave of fast L1s by doubling down on principles rather than execution speed? Let me zoom out for a second because I think this story is about something bigger than just one nonprofit having a rough few months. What we're watching with the Ethereum Foundation is actually a crisis that every major open source project eventually faces: the crisis of institutional maturation. In the early days of any decentralized project, a passionate founding organization can hold everything together through sheer conviction. You don't need bureaucracy when you have mission. You don't need market strategy when you have ideology. But as the ecosystem grows and the money gets real, and the stakes get enormous, that founding organization starts to feel the pressure to become something it was never designed to be: faster, more commercial, more accountable to token holders, more focused on market position. This is the same tension that is played out in the Linux Foundation, in the Apache Software Foundation, in the Mozilla Foundation. It's the tension between the public goods idealism that created these organizations and the competitive commercial reality that now surrounds them. Vitalik's framing of Ethereum as a sanctuary technology, a censorship resistant, privacy preserving alternative to corporate and government controlled infrastructure, is genuinely compelling. In a world where governments are increasingly interested in controlling financial rails and where big tech surveillance is the norm, that value proposition is real. But it's a hard pitch to sell when ETH is down 57% from its highs, and Solana just launched another meme coin that did $1 billion in volume in 48 hours. There's also the Glamsterdam fork to keep in mind. That's Ethereum's next major protocol upgrade, currently in mid-devnet as of late May 2026, targeting a Q3 2026 release. The departures have raised genuine questions about whether the development velocity needed to hit that target has been affected. If Glamsterdam slips into Q4 or even early 2027, that will be seen as direct evidence that the talent drain cost Ethereum real shipping velocity. And that's what the critics are really worried about. Not the manifesto, not the ideology. They're worried that while Ethereum is busy philosophizing, the competition is shipping. So, where does this all go from here? A few scenarios worth watching. Scenario 1: the EF's bet pays off. The smaller, leaner, more ideologically focused foundation stays true to its CROPS principles. Ethereum's privacy and security story becomes more resonant as regulatory pressure increases globally, and the ecosystem matures around the EF rather than in spite of it. Ethereum becomes digital gold, but programmable. In this world, the departures were actually healthy, clearing out people who wanted to turn a public goods institution into a commercial entity. Scenario 2: the critics were right. The talent drain proves harder to recover from than anyone admits. Glamsterdam slips. A new $1 billion ETH advocacy organization gets formed, maybe led by Dankrad Feist and backed by Ryan Sean Adams, and actually becomes more influential than the EF itself. In this world, the EF becomes a bit like the Linux kernel maintainers: important, but no longer the center of gravity. Scenario 3: something in between. The EF narrows its scope successfully. Other organizations fill in the gaps for market development and ETH price advocacy, and the ecosystem finds a new equilibrium: less centralized, more diverse, honestly, maybe healthier in the long run, even if the transition is painful. The one thing all three scenarios have in common: the Ethereum Foundation as we knew it, the single tent that tried to house everything from core protocol research to ecosystem grants to ETH price advocacy, is already over. The question is just what comes next. Here's what I'll leave you with. The Ethereum Foundation is not dying. The Ethereum network is not dying, but something is definitively shifting: a renegotiation of who is responsible for what in one of the most important decentralized ecosystems ever built. Vitalik wants the EF to be a smaller ship. Critics want a bigger, bolder institution that fights for ETH. And somewhere in between, there might actually be a better answer than either side is currently offering. This story is far from over. The Glamsterdam fork will be a major test. The proposed $1 billion alternative organization, if it gets formed, will be a major test. And Ethereum's price action over the next 6 to 12 months will either vindicate the crop's vision or validate every critic who said the foundation needed to get commercial a long time ago. If you found this breakdown useful, please hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who are trying to make sense of what's happening in crypto. Subscribe if you haven't already. And drop your take in the comments. Is Vitalik right to shrink the EF and double down on principles, or did the critics nail it? I'll see you in the next one.